Yep, it's LucasArts, and no, this is not a review of yet another shitty Star Wars game. This is a review of Lucidity, a game that at first glance would appear to be one of a slew of indie games that have been released recently. But believe it or not, there used to be a time when LucasArts did not only develop Star Wars games, there was a time when it had some of the zaniest and brightest people in its payroll, resulting in it churning out some of the wackiest and wide-ranging IPs in the business. Their efforts resulted in Loom, Day of a Tentacle, Sam & Max Hit the Road, the Monkey Island series, Full Throttle, and Grim Fandango, to name a few. Hell, they even developed a pretty damn good World War II flight simulation in Secret Weapons of the Luftwaffe, and a Western shooter in Outlaws. Yeah, they also made a few Star Wars games, but even the Star Wars games were different back then. Namely, they were good. In fact, LucasArts arguably were the creme de la creme of the 90s gaming industry, more beloved and respected than the likes of Sierra, or Origin Systems, or id Software. But something happened since, and coincidentally, it was right around the time George Lucas lost his marbles and released The Phantom Menace. Basically, the good people at LucasArts stopped thinking independently and dynamically, and started to milk the shit out of George Lucas's droopy man-tits. And hence, one shitty Star Wars game after another. But very recently, there's been a slight shift in the wind, a small glimmer of hope, if you will. 3 recent developments are noteworthy. Number 1, LucasArts recently made available a sampling of their old titles on Steam. Now, some of its best games are still not available, but the likes of Loom and the Indiana Jones Adventure series and the Dark Forces titles are. Number 2, LucasArts prettied up Secrets of a Monkey Island and re-released it. I may be reading too much into this, but I have a persistent, although very small hope, that this means LucasArts is tired of George's sour milk and are looking to go back to their old roots and delve deeper into some of their old IPs. Or maybe branch out into new ones. And this is where Lucidity comes in. Number 3, Lucidity is very unlike anything LucasArts has done in years. I don't mean that Lucidity is a great game, it isn't, but perhaps, just perhaps, this is a stepping stone, a sign of things to come. Lucidity is best described as a 2D platformer with some puzzle elements. The basic premise is simple. A character persistently moves from left to right, and the player has to ensure that she continues to move until she reaches the end. There are obstacles strewn about that threaten to stop her progress, and these obstacles come in forms of gaps, unreachable platforms, and creatures and strategically placed spikes that can hurt her. And the character dies if it's hit 3 or so times. The player has access to several devices that are designed to help her avoid these obstacles. There's a staircase-like device that will allow the character to reach otherwise unreachable platforms, a board-like device that will allow the character to cross gaps, a bomb-like device that will destroy any walls or enemies that get in her way, and other devices that have similar functions but unique properties that define their own utility. The player has access to one device at a time, and much like the blocks in Tetris, the device that the player has access to at any particular time is not determined by the player but is randomly assigned. And the game will let the player know ahead of time what device they'll be getting next. The player's main task is to place these devices, and the character will use them when she reaches them. Meaning she'll, say, climb a staircase-like device if it's placed in her path. The reason why I consider this game a platformer more than a puzzle game is because though the player does not have direct control of the character, they pretty much determine where and how the character moves. Also, the puzzle elements are fairly weak. The game tests the player's motor skills more so than their cognitive abilities. It's more of a reaction game, as the player isn't given much time to solve whatever problems the game presents. And if they are given enough time, there's really not much to think about. The game's story is about some girl going to sleep and having a dream in which she's trying to get back home, only to find that the dream has some nightmarish quality in that she's finding there's some kind of force seemingly keeping her away from home, or something or another. The only reason I bring this up is because at the end of each level, and there are 27 levels, the character reaches a mailbox with a postcard inside from her nanny, and the player gets to read it as a means of progressing the story along. Except the postcards basically say the same shit every time. To paraphrase, it says, "Don't give up, just keep on trucking." Now, I haven't completed Braid, but I hear wonderful things about the game's story, and it's told in a similar fashion as it is in Lucidity. I feel like Lucidity missed out on a great opportunity to make something of a story with these postcards. Instead of these postcards containing encouraging messages, why not use them to take the story somewhere? Dreams are often wonderfully bizarre, and the story could have been so much more than just, "Oh dear, you're still not home. But don't worry, keep moving." And it's not just in the postcards where the utilization of a dreamlike world falls flat. I have no major complaints about the art style, but I feel that the art design is woefully unimaginative. Maybe it's just me, but I want some Chris Van Allsburgian bizarreness and creativity. The game's art design is bland and doesn't have much of a dreamlike quality. At best, it feels like some kind of generic children's book. The game's 27 levels are divided into 3 acts. Act 1 is mainly a tutorial, and it is boring as shit. The character will move for about 5 seconds, and when she reaches a gap, the player has to plunk down a board-like device to allow her to cross the gap. Then she walk for about 7 more seconds, and when she reaches a high platform, the player has to place a staircase-like device to allow her to reach the platform. And then she'll walk for another 4 seconds, and so on. It's tedious watching her walk. The pace does pick up as you progress through the levels, but the end of Act 1 is no more challenging than the beginning, since not enough obstacles and challenges are presented at any time in the first act. Act 2 is a huge improvement over Act 1, and it's mainly because you're forced to keep her moving, and that may sound weird since the character is perpetually moving anyway, but that's because Act 2 throws a lot of walls that the character can get past without the player using a bomb-like device that will blow the wall up. And while that wouldn't have been a problem in Act 1, in Act 2 the dream world is being engulfed by this void thingy, so that the left side of the screen is perpetually moving to the right along with the character. And if a character gets stuck behind a wall and can't move any longer, the void thingy will engulf her as well. Plus, there are more of the much needed obstacles added in Act 2 than in Act 1, and it keeps the action moving at a semi-brisk pace. Still, I rarely felt challenged in Act 2, and I feel like the game still has a player watching the character move way too often instead of having them actively participate in their progress. Act 3 is where the game shows hints of brilliance. For one thing, there's very little lull in the action, and that's mainly because there often isn't a platform on which the character is able to stand, so the player is forced to provide one for her by placing the devices in her path. Also, in Acts 1 and 2, the end of each level, meaning the platform with the aforementioned mailbox, is at ground level, meaning it doesn't matter where your character is just before reaching the end platform. She could be 50 feet in the air and she'd just have to jump down to reach the end platform. But in certain levels in Act 3, there are end platforms that are above ground. So if the end platform is high up, at say 50 feet, then you'd have to ensure that your character is near or at or above that height to get to the end platform. And that's not easy, especially with so many obstacles strewn about along the way. There was one level which had a cave for an end platform, and the cave was situated at a considerable height, which meant that I had to maneuver the character to that exact height just before she enters the cave. I wish that more of this was present in the game. Why just force the player to maneuver the character to certain heights only at the end? Why not have huge walls that you have to jump over throughout each level? In fact, I feel that the game's level design is quite lacking compared to other games. The best platformers and puzzle games have levels that strike me as being brilliantly and meticulously designed. Certain levels in games like Braid and World of Goo exemplify such brilliance, but I didn't get that sense when playing Lucidity. I wouldn't be surprised if the level designers just haphazardly placed whatever they felt like placing wherever. That's probably not the case, but either way, I feel that the level design isn't quite up to par with some other games of its genre. But Act 3 is quite enjoyable nevertheless. The frenzied pace at which a game forces the player to react sets it apart from the first 2 acts. If Lucidity is a sign of things to come from LucasArts, then it's a good sign in that LucasArts needs to stop churning out shit Star Wars games and go in a whole different direction. Lucidity is that, a new direction at the least. And it shows a lot of promise, but its fulfillment comes a bit too late near the end of the game. As much as I want to applaud LucasArts for trying something new, something different, for not George Lucasing us to death, I find it hard to recommend the game. Then again, it's $10, maybe it's worth $10 just to experience the last act of a game where it starts to show some brilliance. but as is, it's a game of unfulfilled potential.